Good evening. Welcome. Welcome into 1017 FM and 710 KEEL. Welcome again into another edition of Strategies for Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. You are PLPC Carla McCormick.
I am.
He is the ace of the airwaves, Rapid Reuben Wright.
Good evening, everybody.
You may wonder why I said I am marriage
Yes.
and family therapist David McMillan.
Why did you emphasize the marriage?
Well, I began to think about something, and I don't know why I began to think about this, but we've been back on the air on daily radio since February, since
Right.
first part of February, and I began to think, okay, well, what subjects have we talked about? And Reuben, do you realize what subjects we have not talked about as producer of this program?
I'm going to take a wild guess. Is it marriage?
Yeah. Have we done a show? Have we done any programs really on relationships
not
or marriage?
directly, I don't think.
No.
we did divorce. Remember we did the gray divorce?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, we did that. But that was kind of an end, and we've mentioned relationships and marriages in terms of some of the other topics that
Right.
we have talked about. But have we really focused on relationship and marriage?
No.
Not for a whole show. So today I was looking at my bookshelf, and I ran across a book that I reference a good deal with couples. In fact, I've referenced it. What is this, Wednesday? I've already referenced this book a couple of times this week already.
That means I need to read it.
And it's an older book, and it's one that you may not have heard of. It's by a couple of marriage therapists, Krantzler and Krantzler, Dr. Mel Krantzler and his wife Patricia Krantzler, who are both marriage therapists. And they wrote a book many, many, many years ago. The title intrigued me right away. The 7 Marriages of Your Marriage.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and how couples can make love last by understanding and managing the many marriages and divorces in every committed relationship.
Okay.
Isn't that provocative?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought I'd get your attention. Folks, we're going to talk about the 7 marriages of your marriage this evening. We'll toss it around with you and see what we come up with. Thank you for tuning into Strategies for Living. We are brought to you by CADA, the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse of Northwest Louisiana. Been helping individuals and families now for 60 years. We're also brought to you by Jerry Anderson, State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center, by Jacob's Well, Inspirational Books and Gifts, and by Resilient House. Coming back to talk about the 7 marriages within your marriage, how you can manage them, all those marriages and divorces too, in every committed relationship.
Love me twice today. Love me 2 times, girl.
Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan and PLPC Carla McCormick. Ruben, when I did marriage and family therapist David McMillan a minute ago, you remember Imus when he was on WNBC? WNBC.
Yeah.
Is that how he
Yes,
did?
that's that. Well, all of them, all of the back in the day,
They were trained to say it a
they
certain
were trained.
way.
Yeah, WNBC. And I think at one time, God, that was a massive station. At one time, on the air staff included Don Imus in the morning and
As well as Howard Stern.
Howard Stern
at the same
in,
time. Yeah.
in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a
Insanity.
power packed, insane lineup, right? Anyway, that's enough of our radio nerd stuff. Carla's going to divorce us if we don't get back to the
Right.
task at hand. So I got your attention.
Yes.
The 7 marriages within your marriage. I guess one of us probably needs to look up on Amazon and see if this book is still available.
I can do
because
that.
it's an older book. It was actually, I think, written back in 1992. And I don't have any idea if it had future editions. I've got a first edition copy, but I don't know if subsequent editions came out or if it's still in print or if you can still get it. I hope you can. But if not, I think the information is fantastic. Again, the book is The 7 Marriages of Your Marriage. That's what we will be referencing this evening from Dr. Mel Kranzler and Patricia B. Kranzler. How couples can make love last by understanding and managing the many marriages and divorces in every committed relationship. So let me start by just throwing out the 7 marriages within the marriage. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, number one, and so much of this is just so commonsensical, which is what I really love about it. So the number one marriage within your marriage is the movie Marriage in Your Mind marriage.
Oh,
The second marriage in your marriage is the Our Careers Are Everything marriage. Then there's the Good Enough Parent marriage. Then there's the Time Is Running Out marriage.
so these are basically stages.
Stages within if the marriage lasts long enough, you've got to, every couple, the Kranzlers say, have to navigate through these. The 5th marriage within your marriage is the Is This All There Is marriage. The 6th marriage is the End Is the Beginning marriage. And finally, last but not least, the After Death marriage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, if you stop and think about this for a second, one of the things that they talk about is they talk about the, and again, let's keep in mind that this book is 25 years old, but they talk about the marriage today, modern marriage, and how it is being impacted by the change in culture, the change in society that has taken place, the 80s, the 90s, has continued now on into the 21st century. They talk about things like seeking the services of a marriage counselor when unresolved marital conflicts arise is now actually being viewed as a sign of personal strength instead of weakness. Like, if you go back and you look at marriage counseling and going to a marriage counselor, let's say in the 60s or 70s, pretty much unheard of.
Right.
But pretty much by the 90s into today, it's certainly not seen as a sign of weakness. It's seen as a sign of strength. They say, that the 2-career or 2-job marriage is the primary economic form of marriage today. Toleration for alternative marriage arrangements is kind of built into the structure of our society, they say, since the Ozzie and Harriet families now only account for less than 10% of all families in the United States. Families look very different today than Ozzie and Harriet.
Right, where mom stays home and dad goes to work, and
Or we've got couples who are let's say in a gay relationship, they're raising kids. Families look different today.
Yes.
Marriages look different today.
You know how you can know? Watch the commercials. Watch what the families look like on TV commercials.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Yeah.
the Tide commercial where the dad washes the little girl's costume, you know, because he's home with her every day. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. They say that although many different types of marriages are now workable, all have one essential element in common. They are all together. TWO. They're all together. Marriages or relationships, in contrast to the old stereotyped together form of marriage, in which it was believed that a couple had to think, act, and feel the same in order to be successfully married.
You described that to me one time as enmeshment.
Yeah,
To think, look, act, feel the same.
exactly. They say the relationship revolution focuses attention on improving the quality of marital life rather than ending a stressful marriage and a legal divorce. It asks the fundamental question, do you want a divorce or a new marriage of your marriage? Isn't that compelling?
Yeah, because I think that a lot of times people don't realize that that's possible.
One of the things, and this couple doesn't talk about this, but I talk a lot about creating marriage. And, that because I talk about individually creating us, but you have to see that. You have to see that and claim it, that we are creative beings. And we do that individually. We do that in pairs. And so many people, it's my theory, my thesis, that very few of us have truly created true marriages. Most of what we call marriage is some form of association. And I know that people would argue with me and say, well, no, I got married. I went before a priest or a minister or a justice of the peace, and look, I got this legal piece of paper. It's exactly my point. That, it takes more than that. It takes more that's the legal side. That's the contract side of marriage. Marriage legally is taking our estates and merging them. It's a business contract.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right.
To create, and so that's what I'm calling and deeming a quote unquote association.
Okay.
A real true marriage is made between a couple, and it's intentional. It must be created. It must be created. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a commitment that we're going to do this on an ongoing basis, day after day, year after year, decade after decade.
And so if you're recommitting to the relationship through every stage, then the relationship, the marriage, is kind of evolutionary.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And again, I think one of the things that the Krenslers point out here is it's conscious. And one of the things these 7 marriages within your marriage, to me, illustrate is we have to be very intentional. We have to be very conscious about what we are creating. If we're not, then more often than not, take that C, you've heard me do this before, take that C and move it a few letters down and look what it becomes. Instead of creative, it becomes reactive. And that's exactly what happens when we're not intentional and we're not conscious about what we're making, what we're creating. More often than not, by the time couples get to your office or my office, what do we see? When they sit down before us, we don't see 2 people that are very intentional and ready to do whatever they can to make this work. Instead, what we see are 2 very reactive individuals that are basically saying, hey, fix this.
It's her fault.
It's her fault or
fault.
it's his fault. Fix him, fix her, and make this okay. And part of our job is then to shift that focus from the reactive into one of our earliest jobs is basically a salesperson. We've got to sell them on the idea, just what you said, that you can, that a new type of relationship can be created.
Well, and so then you have to know what you want that relationship to look like, right?
Exactly. We'll talk more about that coming back.
Because I love you too much, baby. Nothing from nothing leaves nothing.
And welcome back.
You gotta have something.
Welcome back into 101.7 FM and 710 Keel.
I'm just chair dancing down here.
Yes, you are. Yeah, Ruben he picks the greatest bumper music in the whole wide world.
Well, there just so happens to be a lot of songs that are about love and relationships, so I got
There you
pretty
go.
lucky on this
There
one.
you go. Talking about marriage and family therapist Dave McMillan, PLPC Carla McCormick, talking about the 7 marriages within your marriage. So the movie Marriage in Your Mind Marriage. Now keep in mind, the Kranzlers say that we have to manage these. You have to be aware of them, and you have to manage these and several divorces within a marriage, quote unquote, because
So a divorce would be the
change from the movement, if you will, giving up one of these
idealism.
marriages into the next marriage.
Gotcha.
So the movie Marriage in Your Mind Marriage, in the first few years of marriage, you begin to discover that your everyday lives together clash with what your expectations were. The expectations derived perhaps from what you absorbed from your parents' marriages, from the media, from the culture you grew up in, and expectations developed from not seeing who your partner really is. The movie Marriage in Your Mind, this clash of expectations with reality, causes there to be more divorces in the first few years than in any other period of marital life.
This is the he doesn't squeeze the toothpaste right. He throws his clothes on the floor.
Yeah, doesn't do the toilet tissue. I mean, you gotta the toilet tissue has to come over, not under. Yeah,
That's this.
yeah, exactly. But you have to navigate through, because we all have those movie marriages in your mind marriage, don't we?
Yeah, when we all have this idea of what marriage is going to look like and what kind of wife I'm going to be, what kind of husband I'm going to be, what
What kind of wife you're going to be to me, what kind of husband you're going to be to me. Yeah.
And I don't. I mean, maybe people talk about that, but I don't even know that there's some of these things you even know to talk about. I mean, you can talk about your budget and you can talk about kids and you can talk about faith, but there's some of this stuff that you don't even know until you're in the relationship that those are expectations that you have.
I think churches as a whole do a fantastic job. Whatever job is being done, they are doing an enormously important task of trying to prepare couples for marriage.
My youngest daughter had to do the love languages.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the Catholic Church has the pre-Cana, diocese by diocese, it's different. I think in our diocese, it's go to a seminar for 4 hours or 8 hours. I don't know, whatever it is.
It's something.
It's something, and I want people to hear. I am underscoring and saying thank you to the churches that do that spend any time, whether it be the minister or the priest saying to the couple, hey, come see me.
Right.
And I want to spend some time with you and let's talk about some things, or something more formal, like you have to go to the love languages seminar. You have to go to something called pre-Cana.
Right.
Whatever it is, I applaud it. I think it's wonderful. At the same time, it's woefully inadequate, based on my experiences of 27 years in the therapy room and my own personal struggles
Right.
within relationships. Because, I'm not going to kid anybody. I've been very vocal. It's a struggle. Relationships are the hardest thing that we do. And it's tough. You gotta, they're not for sissies.
No, but you have to be resilient and you have to be adaptable, and you have to understand. I think the hardest part for me was understanding that. Well, you told me this one time, and it stuck with me, that I was responsible to the person in my relationship.
Not
I was
for
not
them.
responsible for them.
Yes.
Because that gets real cloudy when you love someone.
Yeah. And sometimes to really get clear on that can be a game changer.
Yeah.
It can be a game changer.
It was for me, because I guess I thought, if I love somebody, I would want to help them change, and I could see it. So why that's my job,
That's
and
your
that was
job,
my
yeah.
role, and
What you signed up for.
yeah, and I'm just encouraging them, and I know better, and I should teach them. And
But when you back away from that, you realize that that's an impossible. That is dooming, in some ways, to a part of the relationship, because you're signing up to fail.
yes,
And you're putting yourself in what's called a double bind. You're going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't, if you take responsibility, for someone else's thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
But we get that so mixed up, and if it's there are oftentimes, if there's one thing I can teach a couple in a relationship, it's that it's not your job. Your job, their happiness, their self-esteem, their everything that they need.
That's
is
their
not,
job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's so hard. That line is so blurry, and we think it's our job to prop them up and be there and encourage them, and it is. But there's a line between when we cross the line and it's no longer our job and we're trying to do what they need to do for themselves.
And that's that little word, that change in that one little word, responsible to or responsible for.
Yeah.
In truth, the only person that we would ever be responsible for beside ourselves would be a very young infant who, can't care for itself.
Right.
We have to be responsible totally for that infant until we raise it to the point that it can care for itself. So over time, parenting is a shifting between responsibility for to responsibility to, because over time I want to hand off as much of that responsibility over time. And perhaps maybe on the other end of the spectrum, if we're dealing with elderly, we're caregiving elderly parents who, again, we take back responsibility for them, but not 100%.
But not in the scope of a marriage or of a relationship. Right.
Secondly is the our careers are everything marriage. Once you survive the movie Marriage in your mind, your focus shifts to struggling up that career ladder. In the our careers are everything marriage, the emphasis turns to laying the groundwork for stabilizing your life in a good job so that you can accumulate material goods, savings, a decent home. For the majority of couples, this means adjusting to the demands of a two-career or a two-job marriage. The old division of labor that was the rule for many of our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, the husband as the sole provider and the wife as the mother or the homemaker, is now the exception to the rule.
Do you know what a dink is?
A dink? No. What's a dink?
Double income, no kids.
Oh, for a dink. But, a lot of couples, I think, Carla, get lost here in this marriage. Maybe it's hard to make that shift, because once we do begin to focus on the careers, our jobs, the accumulation, all of that, it can take on a life of its own. It can literally take over, can it?
Well, and I think if you don't make one transition into the next, if you just kind of skip some things, you avoid them, you go around them, you don't deal with them.
Yeah.
Then I think they carry over to the next stage.
Amen.
And then so eventually, if you've carried over enough, then you get to a point where, this little pile turns into this big giant pile that's in the middle of the room that now we can no longer walk around or avoid.
Today, one of the individuals within a couple that I was working with today, worked with several couples today, but gave a great illustration of that. Said, "Have you ever taken a Coke can and just shook it like crazy, shook it, and then opened it? And what do you expect?" Yeah. And the point that was being made is, well, that's what happens when you have all this compressed down and the stress of life, and it shakes us and, continues to shake us, and then something pops us open, we're going to spew.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and in this stage, you see sometimes this is a stage where you see couples will have a baby.
Okay. So that gets us into the good enough parent marriage, right?
Oh, yes.
So childless marriage, they say, they're still the exception. The modern trend is to have one or two children, to maybe have them later in one's marriage, once the careers are stabilized. The same couples who in their 20s insisted they would never have children usually change their mind in their 30s or maybe even early 40s. These couples struggle with the difficulties and the risk of getting pregnant and with decisions about adoption and all those others. So the good enough parent marriage.
Right. And then comes the fights and the struggles over what kind of parent are we going to be?
Yeah.
Who's going to be the disciplinarian?
Yeah.
Because if in one family, you had spanked and one didn't, and dad was the disciplinarian and not mom. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole nother can of worms.
I think in this marriage, you've also got the complication of the blending families today. So many times, you've gone and you've had kids in another marriage, and so he brings kids. The Marsha, the Brady
Right,
Bunch
yours,
thing.
mine, and ours.
Yeah, and then I, and then we have ours. So how do we manage, the executive level of all of these people who are in this system that we've created now as this blended family? How can we be the good enough parent to a stepson or a stepdaughter versus my own biological, son or daughter?
And step parenting opens up a whole new can of worms.
Amen. The time is running out, marriage. So in the late 30s, 40s, you recognize the need to focus on the quality of your life, because you naturally are going to be more aware during that time is limited, that
Right.
that we live a finite, that there is a is there a word, finiteness?
Okay, there is.
There's a finiteness to this thing. So witnessing the severe illness or the death of maybe loved ones, maybe parents, friends, acquaintances, who sometimes, I mean, one of the things that strikes me today is how many people my age are in the obituaries every day. Get your attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that can trigger, we might term it, some people might term it a midlife crisis, for either a man or a woman. But what is that? It's this thing of I'm running out of time. I'm seeing my time as limited. Or if the crisis isn't successfully resolved, there's a chronic discomfort that sets in.
Well, I'm surprised they don't mention like the whole empty nest time. That becomes at the beginning of that.
Yeah.
The kids are gone, and now it's just us. And how do we function? How do we get to know each other again?
Well, I think they do mention that, as a matter of fact. But I think one of the things that they say is that the stress on a marriage as you move from one of these stages to another of these stages, again with 7 stages, maybe perhaps not the 7th stage because that's the after death marriage, but the other 6 stages, the incidence, the pressure to that oftentimes leads to divorce. I'll just leave. I'll just get out of here,
Right.
rather than staying and let's work through this. That puts at any one of these transition points that there's an added pressure.
So that is kind of like a seam.
Yes.
That if it's going to blow, that's where it's going to blow.
That may be where it's going to blow. And again, the importance of staying aware of these 7 marriages within your marriage.
And awareness means discussing it and addressing it, not burying it.
Amen. We'll be back. More to come.
Like a wave crashing into the shore.
You over there rocking the boat.
I love this music.
Welcome back. Welcome back into 101.7 FM, 710 KEEL. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan, PLPC Carla McCormick, talking about the 7 marriages within your marriage. I love this D.H. Lawrence poem. Listen to this.
Okay.
Marriage is the clue to human life, but there is no marriage apart from the wheeling sun and the nodding earth, from the straying of the planets and the magnificence of the fixed stars. Is not a man different, utterly different at dawn from what he is at sunset? And a woman too. And does not the changing harmony and discord of their variation make the secret music of life? D.H. Lawrence.
That's pretty good.
Isn't that great?
That's what he's saying. That it's all a change.
It's all a change. It's all about change, and marriage is a clue to that, and we forget it. You know, we marry each other, and we expect you to stay we expect each other to stay the same. Don't change. You know, and yet, how can that be? You know,
and
it can't.
He's saying it can't.
Yeah, it can't. The fifth marriage within the marriage is this all there is? Marriage.
That would be the disillusionment stage.
Yeah. In the neither fish nor fowl period of your 50s, our society's stereotype is that you're too old to try anything new, too young for Social Security. Frequently in evidence in this is this all there is marriage is an over-the-hill blanket of uncertainty, insecurity, and even hopelessness.
That's disillusionment.
Yeah. The sixth marriage, the end is the beginning marriage. Marital life after 65 means contending with new, unprecedented aspects of your couple relationship. The loss of one's career identity. What's going to take place? How to avoid stepping on each other's toes now that a retired husband and wife are both at home all the time. Contending with the fear of becoming old, ill, and incapacitated. Coming to terms with one's own mortality by choosing either to vegetate in despair or to renew oneself in one's end is the beginning marriage by attempting new achievements in these later years. Retiring to something instead of retiring from work.
Oh, I like that.
Don't you like that?
Oh, I'm going to use that.
Yeah, retiring to something instead of retiring from work.
Changing to something.
Yeah.
Changing to be someone. I love that.
And then last but not least, the after-death marriage, because it's very rare for a couple to die together or at the same time. One partner will inevitably become a widow or widower. In the after-death marriage, one typically experiences grief, despair, self-isolation, continuing to live as if haunted by the dead spouse, feeling guilt about betraying one's dead spouse if one wants sex or wants to remarry, can inhibit self-renewal. One often reimagines one's dead spouse as a saint rather than a human being with flaws like everyone else. It's important to free oneself from guilt over continuing to live while one's spouse is dead. Constructive engagement with the people and events of this world is the healthiest way to remember a deceased spouse.
How to move on.
Yeah, because that's life, isn't it? And that's what that poem really, illustrates. So how do we create a new marriage of your marriage in place of, at any one of these places, there's pressure for divorce? How do we create a new marriage? If you're at a dead end with your marriage, of course you and I are going to say this: go get help.
Right.
We've got so many good therapists in our community. We've got some very, very skilled marriage and family therapists. There is now in Louisiana, we have a designation. It's a part of the licensed professional counselors We got the law through, and the licensure for LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapist. So these are people who have training in systems, theory, and therapy, and they're trained to help people in relationships, in marriages and families, because that's how we operate. That's how we live.
Well, and a family is a system.
It's the strong person who goes to counseling rather than the weak one. It takes somebody strong to go in and say, I'm too close to this problem, Carla. We need your help.
Well, and also it takes somebody who is willing to grow and willing to change and willing to take the brave step of looking at themselves.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Realize that you are not your behavior. You learned, each of you learned whatever self-defeating behaviors that you may be bringing into this marriage. You learned that long before you married. Many of us learned those things as very young people, observing our parents or observing the world at large. And therefore, if it can be learned, it can be unlearned.
And also, you can change your relationship just by being you.
Yes.
You don't have to
Yes.
wait for someone else to change for the relationship to change. I think that's an important thing for people to realize, that, they have more power in their relationships, in all their relationships, than they think they have.
Yes. But you have to know that you have that, and you have to take it. You have to claim it, don't you?
Well, and you have to, and sometimes you have to know how to do that, in a non-aggressive, yes, I'm asserting my rights, and yes, I'm valuable enough to be able to say this and do this for myself.
Try to eliminate judgment. Try to eliminate judgmental labeling of each other, calling each other names. If you have hurt each other, that labeling attacks the person and not the behavior. Try to focus on the behavior, not attacking the person.
Well, and avoid words like "you always" and "you never."
Yes. So if your marriage has turned sour, rather than believing you've been hurt by a bad person, acknowledge that it's soured because both you and your spouse have become somehow unaware of whatever self-defeating behaviors have led you to this place and to this situation. But again, they're behaviors. Behaviors can change. Behaviors can be changed.
And we've always known that.
Yes.
But now we know that our brains can change.
Neuroplasticity.
Yes. So, not only does just the behavior change, the brains change, and it changes for good.
Absolutely.
It's not just a change of your thinking, it's a change of your actual brain.
Absolutely. And this goes so far. Just be kind. Be kinder. Make a choice to be kinder to each other. You didn't marry this person to beat them up. So take a step back and begin to see each other. And okay, well, I know her intent is not to hurt me. I know his intent is not to hurt me, even though that may be what's happening. So just make a decision to be kind and to do kind. Say please. What? Do some Mr. Rogers stuff. Say please and thank you. Smile. Yeah.
Smile.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you.
There you go. So we'll come back in the minutes we have left, and we'll talk about some other ways that you can create a new marriage in place of going to divorce court.
chapel and we're gonna get married. Going to the chapel and we're gonna get married.
And welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for a Living, 1017 FM, 710 KEEL. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan, PLPC, Carla McCormick, and talking about the 7 marriages within your marriage. So you think the book is out of print now?
I do. I can't find it.
You can't find it on Amazon. Well, if you can't find it on Amazon, it probably can't be found. So, but it's still good stuff.
Oh, it's great stuff. And I think the premise that, marriages, as a system and as a relationship go through stages, and you have to be willing to change and mold and adapt.
Yeah, you have to navigate through. You have to be willing to manage that, as well as. And I love the fact that they say there's there's divorces within the marriage too. That you have to you
have to let things go.
You have to let things go. So, for instance, the marriage in your mind marriage, I have to divorce the marriage partner in my mind and commit to marrying and being and making a marriage with the real person.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Thank you. Sometimes I'm lucky.
Sometimes. Most times.
Sometimes Ruben scripts me and just hands me a script. Yeah. I like this because they're talking about ways that you can navigate through this. Learn to identify and disassociate yourself from the hot flashes of the past. The I've been here before feelings you experience with your spouse. For example, if your spouse scolds you, you may actually feel you're once again a vulnerable little child being chastised by a giant parent. And you may unconsciously react to your spouse as if you're that helpless little child, rather than the adult that you really are. So if your spouse is chastising you, you can say, "What are you doing? I'm not your child. We're two adults trying to make this marriage work together. That's not helpful. Now, you want to talk to me? Let's talk."
Right. Well, and we do that though in relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, I call that punching each other's buttons.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm close to you and I know you well enough, I know which buttons to press to get you to react.
Yeah. I like this one too. Learn to identify the underlying meaning of the unhappy emotions you might be feeling. For example, if you're angry at your spouse, the bottom line is that it's really fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not meeting the needs. By focusing on the fear rather than the anger, you can resolve issues that otherwise would be perpetuated.
There's always something under fear, usually.
Good stuff. Let's come back tomorrow and talk more about this stuff.
I love talking about this.
Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. We are brought to you by Cada and Jerry Anderson and Learning RX and Highland Place and Resilient House and Jacob's Well. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call you could make, who would you call? What would you say? Why are you waiting? Make the call. For Carla McCormick, for Ruben Wright, I'm David McMillan. See you next time on Strategies for Living.
News and trending talk. This is 1017 FM and 710 KEEL. KEEL. Shreveport.
He wants hard evidence. I'm Lisa Lacera, Fox News. The pressure mounting on Saudi Arabia for answers.